and welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 91. So, tonight then, this afternoon here in the UK, the rest of Europe and most of Africa, I think, and good morning to those in the Americas, and good evening to those in Asia. Yeah, I'm still stuck on the idea of tonight from having done evening podcasts for the best part of a year and a half. No, here we are on live on YouTube, and it is currently 3 p.m. UK time. So this afternoon, what we're going to be talking about is, if I just minimise that, and where are we? Yeah, that's the one I want to do. So we're going to be talking about the photo shoot I did with the Wave Blues Band at the Coach and Horses Inn in Dumfries. Also, we're going to be looking at some critique today. So we've got Sean sent in this photo of a marketplace, and he's wondering other ways he might have edited the image. We've got Sarah sent in this picture, which, whilst it looks pretty good at this level, when you zoom in a bit, you realise that it's not quite as in focus as she wanted, and she's looking for some tips and tricks about camera settings for photographing birds and wildlife. Robert saw this dog, loved the reflection, got down, took a few photos, is also wondering whether he could have edited it in slightly different ways. Rosemary managed to capture the hills, the snowy hills being lit pink by the sunset in the middle of winter. Again, is wondering about other ways she could maybe have edited this. And also, today we've got Cliffy has done this photo, but the focal length basically is something that he's wondering about, or where's the best place to sort of be focusing things to get as many aspects of it as in focus as you're trying to do. So these are the kind of things we're going to be chatting about today. Right, give you one of these bits. So, here we are, live on YouTube. Let me know you're here, let me know where you're from, tell me what the weather's like. We're here for the next hour or so. If you've got questions for me, plonk them in the comments. If you just want to say hi and hello, please use the comments as well. It's always lovely to know that people are here and I have someone to interact with. Right, I see we've got a few people in already. Sian says good morning, / good afternoon. Meg says good afternoon, everyone. Maggie says hello, everyone, from a damp, cold Castle Douglas. Rosemary says it's a lovely sunrise to all from Washington State, USA. Jackie says hello from South Africa. April says hello, everyone, from LI, New York. You have to tell me what the LI bit is. Roy says, greeting all from cold, damp Yorkshire. Oh, Sian forgot to add that she's in West Central Florida. Yeah, where April's kind of wishing she was. Excuse me, I'm sure there's probably a few people would be thinking, oh, Long Island, says April. Long Island, New York, right? I have heard of it, yes. I'm sure it's cropped up in lots of movies. Okay. Oh, David Dreyfus here says, hi from, it's David from the Waves Blues Band. Brilliant. Okay, excellent. So he can tell me all the bits that I get wrong in when it comes to describing the photo shoot. Oh, Stacey here says, good morning all from a cold and damp Pennsylvania. Cool. Okay, so we have people in. We have photos to talk about. We have critique to give. We have an episode to get underway. Right, so what I'm going to be talking about this afternoon is the photo shoot I did with the Wave Blues Band. And now, I love it when I get a chance to photograph bands. Bands I tend to think are one of the more fun kind of, if you're looking to do creative photography, get hold of a local band, because by and large, local bands are in desperate need of good photography. They don't get most of them never have any money for it. So if you want to go to them with some ideas, they're probably all ears. But they also said that the bands are by their nature, as well as musicians, they're performers. And so, you know, when you get up on stage, even it doesn't matter if you're just playing to 2 people and a dog, in your head, you're playing to 40,000 people at Wembley Stadium. And so it's you can get creative, and they're usually up for good ideas. With the Wave Blues Band, we decided I met up with them a couple of times at rehearsals, and we started sort of shaping ideas of what might be an interesting kind of shoot. Didn't want to necessarily do the band playing. There are plenty of shots where you can go and, of course, go and photograph bands live. They love that. But trying to create a more kind of interesting narrative photo is what we were after. And so after a little bit of talk, we decided about what we would try and do was actually do the shot in a pub, in a bar where the band often plays, which is the Coach and Horses in Dumfries. Coach and Horses, one of these pubs that's been around for centuries, down near the river in Dumfries, suffers floods. Recently, not too long ago, suffered a fire with, I suppose you could say, with the COVID around, the suffering plague. I mean, it gets pretty biblical there. But the great thing about the Coach and Horses is they're really supportive. They do a lot of live music. Now, it's quite a small place. One of the terrible problems of COVID and the hit on the hospitality industry is that they now can't be open 7 days a week in the way they used to be. So they've cut down the number of days that they're open. However, it did mean that they had open space, or allowed us to go in and use the space on one of the days they were closed to actually set up and essentially have the pub as our set. So this was what we decided to do, was to set up there. Oh, sorry, just noticed, got a couple more people in. Smiling Nature says, hello from India. Glad you could make it. Jim says, hi Kim, missed you for the last few weeks. Glad you could make it back, Jim. And Sean says, bit late, sorry, here in Keir Mill in Galloway. Excellent. So, what we decided to do, so what I'll do, I'll show you some of the setup photos first of all. Well, first of all, just to give you a sense of the space. Now, this was taken after we'd sort of set up, but during a little bit of a break. But this is a shot in the pub. I'm standing back by the bar. There's a little bit of residual smoke here from where I've been using a smoke machine. I'll talk a little bit about that later. And that also created these lovely shafts of light coming through the doors and windows. However, with the shutters closed, and generally speaking, the lighting I was using was lit from the off-camera flashes. You can see, so we've got our band here, we've got a table, we've got the drum kit getting set up. And what I've got here is I've got a really large softbox coming down. It's not a hair accessory for Susie. What we've got, I've got an off-camera flash inside that. It's big, so it creates a nice kind of soft shadowed light. The grid on it, what that does is it helps to sort of narrow down so that the light isn't flooding all over the place, but you kind of focus it in a little bit clearer into the area that you want it done. So that gives you a sense of the space we were in. What I did first of all then, if I show you, here's a test shot I did with Ken, the bass player. So what I'm doing, I've decided if we go back here, you can see here's the table, roughly where we set up. So roughly where Dave's standing here, or actually this little stool just down here, pretty much I was sort of plonked myself on that, pointed the camera back towards the table. And that kind of gives you a sense of the angle I was at. You can see this guitar on the wall here on the right. This is the guitar now on the left, on the same bit of wall. So that gives you a sense of the space that we decided to use. We sort of looked around, we thought about shooting into the corner. In the end, we quite liked the idea that this back wall had all these posters, it had guitars hanging, it had a speaker, you've got a jukebox over on the right. Lots of texture, lots of things to play with, and actually, rather nicely, just behind Ken's head, which you can't quite see here, there's a poster which actually says Wave Blues Band and when it's going to be playing. So that all seemed like a good... So what I did here was we've got soft light coming from the softbox down, which is lighting Ken up on the left side of his face, and then I've got an off-camera flash over on the right here to create a side light coming in from that. So that was kind of the first shot, the test shot. What's that going to look like for light? And what I was immediately struck with was there was an awful lot of shadow over here, and I thought once we've got to fit 5 people into this space, there's going to be too much shadow. We need another light. So what I decided then to do was set up a second light over on the left, just out of shot. So you can see here now, you can tell by the way the shadows are coming off this wall. So as well as the large softbox, which is sort of lighting up, let's head back here, which is lighting up the front of Ken's face, we've got, and that other flash over here, which is lighting up the side of the face, we've now got the flash lighting up the left side as we're looking at him of the face. You can see the shadow coming off the guitar to get a sense of where that's coming from. So that's further round, and in fact actually if I go back here, if you look at this setup, just to the right of Eric's head, you can see the off-camera flash there. So that's where I've got that in relation to the other lights. So okay, that gives us sort of slightly better lighting system. So what I thought now I want to do is I want to introduce the idea of coloured gels. This is a very cold light, fairly stark, but if you start putting colours in, then it sort of warms it up a little bit. So okay, this is a quick test shot when Ken had moved, and then here we go. So I've put a blue gel over in the flash on the right and a yellow gel or an orange gel over on the one and the left. And immediately you can see it sort of moves from quite kind of stark and harsh and cold into a kind of slightly warmer, cosier, more interesting kind of bar pub environment. Once we've got that, I now need to start populating. So, okay, let's try and get everybody into position. What we talked about was the idea of two guys sitting at the table playing cards, maybe in a bit of a debate, depending on what was going on. You've got Susie was sort of here, the singer. John Douglas Music in Dumfries wonderfully lent us this fantastic sort of retro style microphone. We've got her in, Eric's here setting up the drum kit in the back, and we've got Ken tuning up the bass. So that sort of started off with that, but immediately I kind of felt that maybe the colour was the wrong way round. That blue over on the right just sort of looked like it was getting a bit too lost in the yellow. So I swapped the coloured gels around, and now you can see we've got, I felt it kind of worked a lot better like this. There's now a kind of warmer light coming from the right, and this cool light from the left is sort of looking a little bit more bar-like. We got Susie to kind of start leaning in as though she's sort of helping Dave with his card set, or maybe she's even spying for Brian over here. Little possible options, but quite like the idea. And then Eric sort of in a kind of action movement doing something with the drum kit. So we sort of got to that place. I'm looking in the back of the camera thinking, yeah, you know, this isn't bad. I think we're on to something. Now we need to really start tweaking where we're putting everybody. And the other thing was I got out the smoke machine. The thing is, of course, for several years now, smoking has been banned in pubs and bars in the UK. So we couldn't actually have anybody smoking. Not I'm sure. Well, I think Brian smokes cigars, but I'm not sure whether anybody else does. Besides which, health and safety and all that. So, but I do have this little smoke machine, a fairly basic thing. You just plug it in, and it's pretty good for kind of you get a little burst of smoke. And you can see that it immediately kind of creates a little bit more atmosphere. You get that kind of smoky bar kind of feel to it. So a burst of that, quick check that the lights were interacting with it okay, and I was kind of happy with that. And so then we start sort of moving everybody about, get a shot here. What we've also done by this point is we decided to stick a bottle of whiskey on the table, which we didn't have earlier. For this particular shot, there's just a bit too much smoke. We've kind of gone overboard. You can see Ken over on the left here. It's getting a bit lost in the smoke. But it dissipates pretty quickly, and within about 30 seconds or so, I'm able to take the next kind of shots. And here now, we've kind of honed more or less the shot we want. And so we've now got the whiskey on the table, we've got the guys playing cards, looking at their cards, we've got Susie leaning over, like gesturing like she's sort of saying play that one, or you know, whatever it is. I love this expression on Eric's face where he's looking across to Ken like, you know, something's going on, something's happening, and it sort of draws you into the story a little bit more. Now, so this was essentially the photo that I then decided to edit up. We've got a few, as well as the fact that it's fairly darkish and I'm going to need to sort of bring out elements of the shadows and I want to create more contrast and what have you. We've also got things like the fact that this softbox is coming into the corner up here. I've got a sense of Ken being just a little bit far out, so actually I want to cut him out and just slide him in to the right, to our right a little bit as well. And once I've done that, this is what I ended up with. So you can see then that we've gone from this to this in the editing process. One of the other things, of course, as well, is that we put the glasses on the table, but we didn't actually put any whiskey in them. The bar very kindly lent us the bottle of whiskey, but we weren't paying for it, so didn't feel we could go helping ourselves to the whiskey. So what I actually did was the whiskey in here is then photoshopped in afterwards, where I've taken elements from the bottle and copied them and warped them and played around to get them into the glasses. I've shuffled Ken in a little bit, but I didn't want to take him too far because actually I quite like the fact that we've got Wave Blues Band sitting in on the poster here, and if I took him over too far, then actually the head of the bass ended up covering it. So it was a little bit of kind of work out the balance of that. So that was what we ended up with. So what I'll do, I'll cut back now, see if we've got any comments, and then I'll talk about some of the individual photos that I did as well. So, I've got a couple of comments here. Oh, Susie's here, says hello. VG says good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad you could make it, VG. VG, I know, is from India, is feeling particularly ill at the moment, suspected COVID. Don't know whether you've had the test yet, but we spoke recently of our video chat, and she was just feeling absolutely awful. So I hope you're I hope you're on the mend soon, VG. Okay. Oh, April says, what is a gel? A coloured lens. Oh, okay. No, right. What a gel is a piece of coloured plastic, really, acetate or. Go. Bear with me one moment. I will go and grab a coloured gel. So, if you hold on for a moment, hopefully you can still keep hearing my voice. And what I can do is I can show you exactly what I do. So, I got a little pack of these, and what these are then, April, is these are little pieces of, you see, there's a blue one, there's an orange one, and you can see I've got a whole bunch of colours. I've got red, I've got yellow, I've got green, there's all sorts of different coloured bits of acetate. If you don't want to go and buy a pack of these, then quite simply you can quite often cut up sweetie wrappers, candy wrappers, little plastic trays. You get this kind of stuff all over the place. Now, and then when you've got your flash, what happens is you can sometimes get little things which you put over, and then you can slot this in. Sometimes with flash, I actually find that this little bit here, the built-in diffuser, I find that actually just tends to clip over the top like that. So I can just kind of slot that in there, and then, oops. So that's what a coloured gel is. So it's a coloured piece of acetate that goes in front of the light and therefore allows it to be a blue light or an orange light. So good question. Thanks for asking me that one. Hope that makes it a bit clearer. Stacey says, what if the bar has those cooler lights? Well, it kind of depends what... I mean, the fact is that the lights that I'm using, those off-camera flashes, basically drown out absolutely everything else. So the ambient light, the way the camera settings I've got it such that the ambient light, even with... if the lights are on and the bar lights are on, you're not really going to see them. It would be too dark. So everything's actually being lit up by the off-camera flashes. So that's allowing me to control the light regardless of whatever ambient light is there. However, you can sometimes make the most of ambient light that happens to be there. You just have to make sure you experiment around with your camera settings to get in if you're wanting existing light to be there as well as the lighting that you're wanting to put in. Oh, Meg says the photo shoot you did was fantastic. Thank you, Meg. That's lovely. Meg's my daughter, and it's always lovely to get kind words from her. Stacey says froze. Okay, I hope I'm back now, but if you do have a problem with that, just try refreshing the page. We've tended to find that for people where the image freezes, that quite often helps. Okay, April says, oh yes, it's a bit like plastic. VG says, beautiful shot, Kim. Transformation after editing is amazing. Yeah, well, thank you. But yeah, the editing is a really key part of this. A lot of people think, you know, you take the photo is giving you then the raw material to go away and edit and polish up. Okay, Stacey's got coloured gels for her flash. And VG and April are talking about vitamins and zinc supplements and what have you to feel better if you've got the virus. Cool. Okay, so having kind of created the main shot, what we also decided we wanted to do was to create a set of individual portraits. Now, originally I had intended to be using the smoke machine for this as well, but for some reason my smoke machine by this time decided to pack up. But what I will do, I don't think it really mattered in the end, but what I will do is I'll just show you some of the individual shots. So that idea, we've now got the, you know, we've got this scene, we've got the scene now. This is the one that can be used for posters, Facebook headers, promotional imagery, sent out for press releases, however you want to use. It's got that, it's a stage narrative shoot where people look at it and go, oh, look again. You could, because there's instruments, you know it's a band. It's got that smoky bar effect, the close out of it. Well, okay, so it ties in with that whole idea of a blues band. But it's a little bit more interesting than just everybody standing still with their instruments looking into the camera. But we did want to have individual photos which showed off who was doing what. So from here, I took this one of Eric. As you can see, I've got the same lighting system up, so you can see that we've got the orange gel over on the right, which is kind of giving him this sort of you know, lighting. You can see how it's lighting the back of here and the edge of his hair, and the blue gel is coming in from the left, which is catching him, side of his arm, side of, you know, little bits of the chair and little bits of the cymbals and the edge of the drum kit and things like that. This one we did a Brian, so Brian does some of the singing as well, so occasionally, so he's got the microphone there as well as setting up with the guitar. Susie, our singer, then going for the shot, she's there with the microphone looking into it, and again you can see the way the light is kind of catching, so we've got the yellow orange gel catching her hair on this side and the blue gel catching her hair on this side. Ken then here in action with you know, ready with the bass. Again, everybody is looking straight into the camera, no messing about. And then Dave here with his harmonica at the ready. And again, it's worth remembering that because the main light that I'm using is still coming from that giant softbox, that's kind of giving us that's what's mostly lighting up his face. But these extra layers of light, having the blue light here and the yellow light coming in and catching here, is adding this sort of three-dimensional depth to each of the images. So, you know, parts of the image even. So if you look at his hand here, slightly yellowish tinge on the back here, slightly bluish tinge here. Similar over here, you've got the blue coming on the left, the yellow sort of hitting his hand there, and it's giving us this very kind of three-dimensional sense. And then I've enhanced that slightly in the editing as well, using the clarity slider for those who use Photoshop, just to kind of intensify, I don't know, a grizzled look as such, but the lines, the texture, the landscape of the skin, the face, the image, and it helps to kind of get across that sort of slightly grittier blues band feel to it. And then as a final little kind of bonus photo, there was a point sort of in between actually doing the main photo and doing this, where Brian was just sort of sitting, he was waiting, I can't remember whether we were having lunch or he was waiting for me to do something anyway, so he's sitting there and he just started sort of sitting in the middle of the floor, well, on a stool, and was playing and singing. From the angle I was at, I thought, oh, that's a really good shot, so I quickly grabbed the big light, moved it round, and then took this shot. And here we can see Brian playing, and we've got Ken and Dave in the background. They were chatting away, and then there was a bit where Dave decided to pick up his harmonica and join in with Brian there as well. And this was absolutely a grabbed shot. This was found. You know, I was sort of sitting there having probably a bite out of a sandwich, and I suddenly thought, oh, I like the look of that, and so I quickly moved the light round to try and get it. It's always worth doing that, remembering that if you've got a quiet moment, just kind of look around and say, you may have gone in to get the actual, you know, you've got an idea of the actual shot you're going, but sometimes it's worth kind of grabbing these extra shots as and when you see them. So that shows you then, that's pretty much the photo shoot that we did. I've shown them to the band. The band all seem to be really happy with them as well, which is great. So I think now they did have a gig lined up later this month. Current COVID situation, I don't know whether it's still going to be going ahead or not. If any of you guys, Susie, Dave, you're watching just now, you happen to know, then do leave a note in the comments to let us know whether, as far as you know, whether what date the gig is and if it's still going ahead. Right, okay, so that's where we were. I hope you found that interesting. If you've got any further questions about that shoot, drop them into the comments, let me know, and I'll do my best to answer them. Right, okay, so what do we do? We'll move on to the critique section in a moment. Just a quick reminder that if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, you would like to support them in some way, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one way you can do that. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to move on to the critique section. This is the point whereby different people have sent in images and I can give feedback and help you pass your sticking points. So if as you're taking photos, you're not sure what you've taken something, you're not getting what you want, you're editing something, you're not getting it where you want, you're not sure where to go next, send me your images, tell me a little bit of background about the image, what you're trying to achieve, what your sticking points are, and I'll do my best to help. Susie says no gigs for a bit, but you can follow us on Facebook for most of the up-to-date information. Okay, thanks very much for that, says Susie. So that's the Wave Blues Band. So type that into Facebook and you'll find it easy enough. Oh, Robert's here, says, sorry I'm late, howdy from Texas, I was shooting landscapes this morning. I'm glad you could make it, Robert. You'll have to rewind and watch from the beginning to see my stuff about the Wave Blues Band. Cone Pedar says VUR FYI. That sounds like one of those dodgy spammy kind of comments, so I don't know. Susie also says we're on SoundCloud, a link to follow. Okay, well if you're watching the following the comments, then Susie will stick a link into that for you. Steve Page says, oh welcome Steve, says never done images with a softbox and flash gel, but I must say I love the way these images have turned out. To definitely watch more of your channel. Well, thank you very much Steve, much appreciate that. Okay, right, so what we're going to do then is, so let's go back then, so now we'll move on to the critique section. So what we're going to have then, first up we are going to look at Cliffy. Right, so yeah, so let's see. We'll move over to here. So what happened here? Cliffy sent in this photo and he says, this is a photograph I was asked to create for a Sinatra tribute act. I've cropped a fair bit of it to make more of the photograph, as there was originally a lot of more dead space to the left for the advertising text. Well, this is very true. Quite often when you're putting together a photo, the first thing you need to ask your client about is how is the photo going to be used, and in this case if you know that there's going to be a lot of text cropping up on one side, then it makes more sense to kind of shoot the photo in such a way that it's easier to place the text there. However, if you're just then using it as a photo in itself without the text, sometimes that can feel quite unbalanced. So Cliff has recropped this to the size that it is. Anyway, he goes on. It's a 2-light setup, a key light and a softbox coming from the front left. So similarly then, almost probably identical to the sort of setup that I had, where he's got a large softbox coming down from the left. As we're looking at this, imagine that you've got the big softbox kind of sitting over your left shoulder. Going. And then what he's also done is he's got a rim light on minimum power. So you've got another off-camera flash off to the right, and that's what's then giving this edge light here to the Sinatra figure. It says, I'm happy with the setup and the pose and the overall feel of the photo, but looking back now, I wish I'd used a narrower aperture to get the props more in focus, although I do like the fact that the focus is drawn to the eye. When creatively setting up a photo, how do you go about creatively selecting an aperture value? Okay, so what Cliff's talking about here then is the fact that whilst the eye's nice in focus, which is exactly what you want when you're doing it. So come back to that. when we kind of move in a bit, by the time we get to the whiskey, it's starting to go out of focus by the edge of the cards. These cards are out of focus. The front of the microphone's out of focus. The whiskey glass is out of focus. So the depth of field the aperture he has used has affected the depth of field. The depth of field being essentially how much of it is going to be in sharp focus. Now, the narrower aperture you have, the more of it will be in focus. The wider aperture you have, the more light it lets in, but the shallower the depth of focus. So, what we have here is it's sharp enough for the fact that his hat and his eyes are in focus, and the collar and the shirt, but by the time we get to his fingers here on the front hand, or well, both hands, it's starting to go out of focus here. Fingers are slightly more out of focus there. And then, as we say, we get down to the microphone, less focused here. Other thing I would say, Cliffy, just before I move on to the focus, is I would say partly you could really have done with moving that rim light a little bit higher and pointing it down. And the reason for that is we've lost his hat. If we move right in, we can just about see either that, or you would have to sort of play around with the editing a bit. I think it becomes quite important if you're shooting, because he's got a black hat and it's a black background, it's all got lost within it. So to play around with the angle of the lighting, I think, becomes really important. Now, you quickly saw the flash up of the other photo, the next photo, because this reminded me a bit of a photo I did earlier in the year, which was this one. Some of you may remember me talking about doing this, where essentially we've got a bloke with whiskey sitting at a table with a trilby type hat. Obviously this one's a self-portrait. I'm not trying to do a Sinatra impression, no cards, no microphone. But in terms of lighting, the really important bit here is that what I've got a light above and behind. And the above and behind is what's then allowing, you can see the way the light, so I know it's a brown hat rather than a black hat, but the same thing applies, that you've got all these edges and rims lit up, and that really gives definition of the hat and separates out from the background. I think for something, so if we go back to this photo then, Cliff, you're really looking to have separation from the background, and the best way you can do that is a backlight. Now, you've got a nice bit of side light and it is slightly behind, but I think if you'd raise the light higher so it was coming down and then really outlining this hat, that would have created a stronger separation. Okay, that's I know you didn't ask for that bit, but I think it's a kind of important point because it feels to me like the hat's getting lost. As for aperture, this is one of those things where you are making an aesthetic choice, or an artistic choice as to what you feel needs to be in focus. I don't know what setup you've got here. In this one, I had mine. This is 24mm, and it's f6.3, and 6.3 allowed most of my body to be in focus. We can tell here, though, that by the time we get to the hand and the whiskey, it's just starting to go out of focus. Probably if I'd had something like an f8, and certainly if I'd had an f11, we would probably have found that the hand and the whiskey glass would have been in focus. So I would say similarly then with you, on something like this, maybe you'd want something like an f11, maybe even an f13 or an f16 if you really want to be sure of making sure everything from his ears through to the front of the microphone happen to be in focus. So you can do it. You can go either way with your aperture. So you can either sort of do that really narrow aperture, f13, f16, and make sure everything from front to back is as in focus as it can be. Or you go the other way and you go really shallow depth of focus. Go for something like an f2.8 or an f3.5. But always importantly, the eyes. The eyes have got to be the bit that's in focus. Whenever you've got a face, there are occasional exceptions, but in a case like this, you make sure the eyes are in focus, and then everything else could be softly out of focus. There's maybe ways to play around with the background as well, just to sort of point out that with this one, for those who remember when I went through the editing process with this, like this, I actually shot this against a black background, and a black cloth background, and I added the wall texture in afterwards in Photoshop. But importantly, when I added the wall texture in, I blurred the wall texture so that it looks like it's a little bit out of focus. And that gives another sense of depth and distance. By having an out of focus background, gives you a sense of another way of creating a separation between figure and background. So when we come back to this, I think it is all about you deciding what's really important. I mean, it was interestingly when you put this into the Facebook group, I think it was Pat who turned around and said, actually, why isn't he holding the microphone? And I think that's an interesting idea, is if you've got him gesturing with his hands, but maybe we're not quite so clear what it is he's doing with his hands. Maybe if he'd had the glass of whiskey in one hand, that would have been interesting. If he'd had cards in a hand, that could have worked too. Or if he'd even had the microphone in his hand. Having said that, you know, you're making decisions here. I like the notion of the chips and the cards and the dice and the whiskey. So you're getting all these kind of bits in together. But separation from the background, I do feel like he's just lost too much. The rim light on the hat, I think, would make a lot of difference. Or a kind of slightly out of focus background texture as well could do it. But yeah, I think is kind of what I suppose what it comes down to is, what's the most important bit? Is the most important bit his expression, or essentially is it the props around him? Are the props around him as important as the man himself? And what you're doing is you're weighing up that balance, that when we take the photos, we've got to decide what's important. What's the narrative we're trying to get the viewer to take away with them? The viewer will just look at it and go, I like it, I don't. The viewer's eyes will get drawn to where we have created situations to draw the eye to. So they get drawn to the face because we've made the face lighter and brighter. They'll get drawn to the face because the face is in focus and something else isn't. We get drawn to the face because there's a line coming through somebody's base, or a microphone pointing or something like that. I mean, when I did this one, the way the arm curves and slants up creates this diagonal which draws so the arm itself becomes a leading line. Likewise, this arm here also comes straight up to the face. So with both of these arms coming up, you kind of create a cross where the face is. So you're deliberately drawing the attention to it by the lines you use. So through use of line, focus, lighting, aperture and blurriness, sharpness, these are all the tools that we use to draw attention to where we want the attention drawn to. If we want the attention, if everything's about the eyes, we want all the attention drawn to the eyes, and then everything else is just a kind of sort of supporting act. But if these props are actually just as important, if you feel that it's not just about the eyes, it's about the fact that we've got this kind of gambling setup, then at that point you do want them more in focus, and you do want attention drawn to them. At which point maybe so you go for the deeper aperture, the narrow aperture, but you could also play around with the lighting a little bit more to create just a touch more lighting coming in from an angle to highlight the edges of some of these things as well. So our attention will also get drawn down to the pieces. So I hope that gives you some thoughts, ideas to play around with there, Cliffy. Great fun going for these kind of photos though. Yeah, so thanks very much for sending that one in. Right. What have we got here? Susie says, don't go clicking these links till after Kim's finished. Okay, yeah, thanks. Right, April says, nice shot, Cliff. I can picture a gel colour getting involved. Yeah, I mean, again, you can play around with the coloured gels in the same kind of idea. Rosemary says the higher rim light of Cliff's photo might also reduce the bright shine above the ear. Susie says, so interesting. Jim says, for a high f value, say f16, do you focus on the centre of the model or in front of the cards? Okay, now that's an interesting point, because actually it does kind of depend on the lens, and in a way what you've got to do is you've got to do a little bit of experimentation, because there's a point here where if we say you're focusing this way, and this is the bit here that you're trying to get in focus, and you're shooting from this direction. When we talk about a depth of focus, what we're talking about is how much either side of this is still going to be in focus when you go click. And in a narrow depth of focus, you've not got much before it goes out of focus. And with a narrow aperture, a deep depth of focus, you've got a lot more either side of it that will be in focus. But is this always in the middle? And no, it isn't. There are different lenses and even different camera systems use slightly different things. So that actually what might happen is, whilst whatever it is you're aiming at will be in focus, you might find that 2/3 of that room or that still in focus is in front of the lens, and only 1/3 of behind the lens is in focus, or vice versa. So what we're talking about is the focal point doesn't necessarily always sit in the centre. Where it starts to drop off and go out of focus might be further ahead or further behind the image that you're actually photographing. If it becomes absolutely crucial with that, the thing to do is experiment, because it does vary from lens to lens, and it does vary from camera system to camera system. So if you're not sure, one of the things you can do, little quick tip for a setup, get a tape measure and run a tape measure from, along, the depth from your camera, and then sitting your camera on a little mini tripod or something like that, stick a match or something on the tape measure, say, so where it says 5 inches, focus on that, take your photo, and then you can see from the tape measure how much of it either side is in focus. Does it sort of go out of focus by the time you get to 7 centimeters or 12 centimeters? Is it going out of focus in front when you get to 3 centimeters or 1 centimeter? So quick little trick for doing that then. So play around with different settings, make notes if you need to with your camera, with a tape measure, and that gives you a rough sense of whether you really need to make sure that if you're wanting to get everything in front of the person in focus as well as the person, but you're actually not so bothered about what's behind. So yeah, a little bit technical, but worth playing with if that's the way you're going with it. So yeah, interesting question that, Jim. Excuse me. Okay, next what we're going to do then is move on to Sean. So Sean has said this, okay, let's bring up Sean's photo first before. So this is Sean's photo. Sean says, this is my wee submission for critique. I have a series of photos from a market near my in-laws place in Madrid on a recent visit. I've just submitted this one because there are loads and I don't want to inundate you. Well, I appreciate that, thank you. I found myself very struck in how our eyes become the main means of expression with all the mask wearing requirements we now have. I felt that although the market has so many vibrant colours, black and white or sepia, because he also sent in a sepia version here, which you can see here, allow more focus onto the human interactions. And I've also cropped to portrait orientation for much the same reason, as these were initially quick snaps on the spur of the moment. I'm a bit unsure how to get the most out of converting to black and white, and whether or not my cropping composition gets the most out of the scene. This is a totally new subject for me, as I previously felt very shy about taking photos of people, but I would like to explore further. Well, I think actually a marketplace is always a great place, Sean, because everybody's kind of busy, bustling around. You can take photos. Nobody's likely to be too worried about it. Unless, you look like some kind of government official and people feel like they're starting to get it. But in a way, the more touristy you look, the better with something like this. People just see you as a harmless tourist and probably just try and sell you something. So what we've got here then, we've got the photo, you've got the interaction, and we are with this immediately drawn to the eyes. Now, what I will say is what Sean's usefully done is he's sent in the original photo. Now, what's quite interesting, now, so what you did here was you cropped in, you did a black and white version, you did a sepia version, Because what you wanted to do was you wanted to really draw in attention to this little bit of interaction. But within that interaction, I would say we almost miss out. The woman here who he's passing the change to, or receiving the money from, is kind of so dark compared to him. We get drawn here. We know he's interacting with her, but she doesn't seem to be an important part of the picture. If we go to here, we can now see her, and I think she becomes much more an important part of the figure. Now, I was really interested to see the kind of full shape of this, because while I understand you wanted to sort of crop him off, I have to say that I really like the bigger scene here. I really like that sense of interaction that you've got within a setting. So crop wise, if I let me just open this with Photoshop for a moment, and for my money, really, I mean, you maybe don't need quite so much at the top there, so you can crop down something like that. You can crop up a bit, maybe pull this in just a little bit, but not too far. I like that idea of having some of the fruit and veg over here. This guy disappearing out the back, I quite like that too. So if we sort of crop something like that, the thing is, this guy's eyes really are grabbing all the attention. So I don't think we actually lose anything by this, because this is the first place you get drawn into with it as well. And I think, well, it might have been quite nice to be able to see this guy's face. I think the fact that he's disappearing behind the bags is all right. The fact that we've got a bit of arm coming in here, what it creates is a sense of a bigger scene out with. It's not just the guy handing, or it's not money, it's handing over the bag. But it's you get a sense of the whole environment, and there's something about that I really quite like. And then what you might want to do, if you've got a crop like this, a little bit of kind of, in terms of quick editing, a little bit of vignette on the edges, just to kind of darken down the edges a little bit, to kind of bring a little bit more attention into and maybe kind of touch on the clarity a little bit, just kind of sharpens it, kind of draws it, and maybe if you want, because the clarity kind of dulls the colours a little bit, boost the vibrance a touch, just to kind of keep the colours there. And so what we've done is we've gone from that to that. Let's move in a little bit more. And it kind of draws your attention in, while at the same time, I think, creating an interesting outline. Now, as for black and white, the thing is that there's multiple different ways of converting to black and white. In fact, actually, I've even got, if I move on to that now, we'll spend another 20 minutes talking about it. But it is something I can come back to. But what I would say is, if you're sitting here on my YouTube channel at the moment, if you go back straight into the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Kim Ayres, and go down to bite size and look up, scroll back a few through there, you will find where I've got 4 or 5 different ways to convert to black and white, and watch that. It's a section I took out of one of my previous things, and it talks about the fact that there are multiple ways to convert to black and white, because one of the problems you have with converting to black and white is actually when there's a lot of stuff going on in the picture, it can sometimes just become kind of a bit too busy, and knowing what it is you're looking at, you can kind of lose. But also something like a market, I really like the kind of full colours of the market. So if we go back to your image here and we go to black and white, I feel that we've lost something. Always when you're converting to black and white, you've got to think, well, what am I losing, but what am I gaining? And there are some things which work really well in black and white, especially if you've got a stronger contrast. But in this case, I feel you've actually kind of lost by the black and white. I think that the colour kind of works better. And like I say, because all your eyes, you're absolutely right about that notion. With the mask, we just get drawn totally to the eyes. I mean, interestingly, it's only when we zoom in do I realise he's actually got a beard coming round underneath here. Of course, we don't know when people got masks now, unless they've got a big beard, which is kind of coming out the bottom of the mask. Not sure about whether they do or not. But yeah, but we are drawn to his eyes anyway. It's a really strong image. His arm coming out, gesturing forward, gaze directly on the customer. So I think the black and white actually loses something in that. But for all that, if it's black and white conversion techniques you're looking for, then like I say, do look at the bite-size options in the Kim Ayres YouTube channel. And you'll find I've got a whole section on how to do that. But it is something I will revisit from time to time as well. So thanks for sending that one in, Sean. I hope you find that useful. Now, April says, I really like this photo, and actually April prefers the black and white version. Susie says, true, we are using eye contact to communicate more now. I like the original colour one. Jackie prefers the bigger scene as well. Right, okay, so what we're going to do now then is we're going to move on to Rosemary. And Rosemary sent in this photo, and she also sent me the original here, so she's edited that into this, and says, I would like your advice on post-processing here. Some wind turbines. I've been waiting all year to get this shot. Very patient of you. I was really excited to be able to catch the sunset on the fresh snow. Perfect conditions. The colour in real life felt more vivid than the raw file shows. But have I overcooked this? I think the composition has better balance without the dull sky on the top, and I wish I cropped it out before submitting to this photo crowd. I believe you mentioned before we should sleep on our edits before sharing. And it's true, it's a good point. Very often, if you're not sure, we can edit something, we feel really excited, we just want to get it out there straight away and we shove it out. But actually, if you sleep on it and come back to it the following day, very often you'll notice alternatives you could do with the edit or bits you'd missed in your excitement of the original one. So yeah, if you do have the time, yeah, give it 24 hours, go back to the photo and see if you're still happy with the edit. If you are, then great, put it out there. But sometimes you will find that it was worth waiting because suddenly you see something you didn't notice the first time round. So I kind of think you're right about this sky. I think the real action here is happening when we move in without the cropped, without this bit of sky here. There's the beautiful dramatic clouds here which are picking up that same low pink that we've got in the things. Your other bit, have you overcooked the editing? It's really difficult because I don't know what it was originally like and what you're trying to express. That notion of the really low sun, the pink clouds bouncing light about the place is a lovely one. And sometimes you need to... interesting you say that it didn't reflect in the raw file. So this was your kind of original edit. Now, the thing to remember about raw files as opposed to JPGs, when you take your photo, if you are getting the raw file is... I'm going to say it's like dampened down. It's not as vibrant. It's not been edited yet. Your raw file is there ready to be edited. You'll very often find that your raw file doesn't look as interesting as the JPEG if you shoot both together, because your JPEG has already been edited by the camera. The camera itself has decided that it needs to brighten this bit and oversaturate that bit, or so there's a kind of an automatic editing process going on. The raw file contains all the information, but it's fairly dull on its own. It's there to be enhanced. So it all comes down to how you then decide to edit it. So if we take this picture and let's take it into Photoshop. We'll just close Sean's there for the moment. So first of all, there's the crop. And I think in this case, you're right. Maybe if we take it down and we just crop out all that above sky, because the real interesting bit is the textured sky behind there. Then you want some of the tree, but not all of it, but you want some to create that sense of layer. This is now becoming very landscape. I think we don't need that gap over to the right. We can probably pull it to something like that, and we do that. And that to me feels like a kind of a good kind of comfortable crop, and which actually, if we just close that, come back to here, is pretty much the crop you've got there, apart from the extra bit of sky on here. Then what I can also see you've done is you've basically kind of quickly edited out things like that little bit there, which was kind of capturing the attention a bit. So we'll just take those out for the moment. Now, this is still kind of at a raw level. What else can you do to it? Well, I'll just duplicate that for a moment and we'll take this into Camera Raw. And again, always worth taking a quick check, I think. Do a very slight vignette. Don't want to overdo it because that just doesn't look right. But I think just nudge it down a little bit, kind of take the edges, draws our attention into the flow of what we're wanting. And then when we come to here, now there's different ways you can go about it. If you take the contrast and kind of boost the contrast like that, that becomes quite interesting. We get stronger shadows. This bit here becomes more silhouetted. It does tend to kind of push the colours up rather, it exaggerates the colours as well, so they start looking less natural. Another option here is to use the clarity tool, I think, where it kind of helps to deepen the shadows and lift the highlights a little bit. Maybe take the highlights down, shadows up, play with the clarity. Adds a little bit more texture, but I think it does still need a boost of colour. And at that point, you can either do the saturation, which kind of overkill, or some vibrance can sometimes be a little bit more subtle. Up the vibrance a bit, maybe the saturation just a touch, something like that. Fiddle around with the clarity a little bit more. And so you can see we've kind of gone from that to that. Now, the sense of whether that's too strong, too much, is really down to a sort of certain personal taste. And there's also where you're showing it. If you're showing this on one of those sites like PhotoCrowd or Guru Shots, the online photography competition sites, then actually you probably do want to slightly boost the saturation just a little bit if you want to get it noticed and for people to sort of clicking the like. If you're putting it in a print situation whereby people are just going to be sort of looking at it on its own without comparing it to a whole bunch of other photos, then you want to be careful about overdoing the colours because it will then look a bit sore on the eyes. So there's a little bit of where you're trying to naturally find a balance on that. And I think generally speaking, for print purposes, be careful about oversaturating the colours. Also, if you're just having the photo on its own, say as a Facebook banner, when people are not looking at anything else, be careful about oversaturating it. But if you're in one of these situations whereby people are scrolling through hundreds and hundreds of photos and you've got to make yours stand out a little bit more, maybe nudge the saturation up a little bit more so the colours do grab the attention. So a little bit depends on where you're showing it as to how far you want to do. And for that matter, your own personal taste, really, where you so much of this is about what you really want, what you feel fits with your aesthetic. You take those sliders and every one of us would sort of, we're moving to the left, we're moving to the right, we would probably stop at a slightly different point. We've all got our own sense of what we feel is just right, not enough, too much. And part of where we put those sliders, the more we do that, the more that becomes our style as such. Right, okay, so I hope that helps, Rosemary. It gives you a few little pointers and ideas. So thanks very much for sending that one in. Right, where are we? Sean says, eyes totally opened, Kim, many thanks. I'm glad that was useful, Sean. Okay, April says, wow, looks like a desert sand, the snow. Theanne says, understand better about raw files. April says, yes, I like the additionally cropped bit. Rosemary says, it helps to remove the blank sky, thanks. April saying, how about erasing the two twig trees on the left? Again, I mean, I was concentrating more on the overall part, but yeah, you can get in fine detail and either remove bits, or you might decide that actually that little bit of slightly out of focus tree that was on the left adds to that sense of depth in the way that we were talking about with Cliffy's photo about your aperture, and you know, a little bit of out of focus here gives you a sense of it being more in focus further away. But again, personal call on that one. And Rosemary says that's helpful. Good. Excellent. Okay, let's move on to Sarah then. Now, Sarah has taken this photo and says, I just upgraded to a Canon 90D. Focus is my main problem. I keep getting blurry wildlife shots quite a lot. This was one of my better shots, but it isn't as sharp as I'd like. So at first glance, it looks fine, but as soon as we start moving in, we notice that it isn't as sharp as we initially thought it was. I just want some pointers on settings and what I can do to improve, really. I was using a monopod and it was quite a windy day. So I then asked Sarah if she could elaborate on what her camera settings were, and this was an f6.3, 125th of a second, and ISO 125. Now, I think really, if this was a windy day, I think part of your problem here was your shutter speed was 125th of a second, probably not fast enough. If this bird is swaying slightly, if you're getting blown slightly, and also this is really, now unless you really cropped in small, I'm guessing here that you've used a zoom lens. And one of the things you have to remember is with a zoom lens exaggerates movement. So things go out of focus because of movement blur much more easily with a zoom lens. Talked about this before, you might not have been around when I did, Sarah. But let me show you something for a moment. If some of you will have seen me do this before, but if I take a pen, right, let's stick a pen, where am I going to do it here, right, so you can, yeah, there we can see the pen, right. Now, if where my thumb is, I make a little bit of a movement, where the tip of the pen is, there's a lot of movement, right. So a little bit of movement here, a couple of millimeters movement here, can create a couple of inches movement at the other end, right? So we know this. We know that something that's longer, a little bit of movement at one end creates a much bigger movement at the other. Now, consider that with your zoom lens. When you zoom in with a lens, the slightest movement at this end with the camera becomes more exaggerated. The longer your lens, the more you're zoomed in, the more that movement exaggeration becomes. So what might, with say, if you've got a 70mm lens, 125th of a second might be perfectly okay for you not to worry about movement wobble at your end. But if you've got a 200mm or a 300mm lens, 125th isn't going to do enough. You might need to do 250th of a second or 300th of a second or something like that, just to get the same kind of stability with it. So really, I think your key here is in shutter speed. I think you will have to go quite a lot higher with your shutter speed than you actually think you do. And again, there's a certain notion here of experiment. Now, the offset or the problem with the faster shutter speed is obviously you end up with less light coming in, so you have to tend to go for a wider aperture. So if you're going for a wider aperture, you then have the potential for it not being quite in focus, or it focuses on the front of the wing but not on the head. So you then have to be more accurate with your focusing, or you need a good focusing system on your camera that does the autofocus where you want it to. And the other thing is you might have to start bumping up your ISO. So your ISO is the other way of compensating. It does mean that your picture becomes slightly grainier and noisier. It's a balance. You've got to really try and work this out. This is always a problem for wildlife photographers. If your wildlife is sitting still and it's not windy and you've got your camera on a tripod and you're able to keep it really still and there's nothing to worry about wobbling, then you can go for slower shutter speeds. But the slightest bit of movement, and this is the problem, wildlife, there's nearly always movement. The bird itself could just be moving for a fraction, and then suddenly it's not as sharp as you would like it. So, and then certainly if you're trying to catch birds as they're flying, as they're landing, as they're taking off, you really do need to have the faster shutter speed. So I would experiment with that. Certainly look up a few, see what articles you can find. You will probably find online, quick Google, you can find articles which will say minimum shutter speed of 500th of a second, 800th of a second, 250th of a second, or whatever, and see how that comes out. But I think if you get the hang of the shutter speed, and 125th is pretty certain now already is just not going to be fast enough. Something like this might have required a minimum of 250th, and then it would have been much more likely to be in sharp. So it's not just about the focus, it is about the shutter speed, because any slight wobble you've got in the camera, any slight wobble you've got with the wind blowing the branch, and immediately it's not sharp enough. So hope that helps, Sarah. Hope that gives you some information. But a lovely picture, and thanks for sending it in, and I hope it gives you I look forward to seeing what else you create. We've got somebody else coming in here with some really odd, funny. I'll tell you what, I'm just going to delete that message Where was that one earlier as well? I'm very suspicious of these ones which have 3 letters and then a dot for something else, whether they are just a signal to come in and do something. So yeah, not happy with that. Okay, right, so where are we? Had a couple of others. Okay, right. So Sean says, I think I fall too easily into the trap of using the original aspect ratio trap. Your tips on cropping are sorting a lot of barriers for me. Well, that's good to know. Thank you. Meg says, beautiful photo, and a renowned to Sarah's bird. April says, it's a pretty bird. Rosemary says, Sarah, your bird is beautiful. Subject, I can understand why the lack of focus is frustrating. April says, it really is hard to do bird photography. They are quick. Fiji says, beautiful, wrapped in a cloak, warm and comfy, loving it. Okay, let's move on then. So, last one of the day, and then I will tell you what we're up to next week. So, last one we're going to talk about now is Robert. And Robert sent in, where are we? Sent in this photo of the dog. Says, this was a beautiful dog we saw by a grain mill. Evidently the mill workers feed her because there were a lot of dog food cans nearby. She was a bit skittish and I didn't get a chance to get many pictures of her, but I thought this was the best one. I decided on black and white due to the monochromatic colours in the frame. Let me know what you think I could have done better. Crop, black and white edits, etc. So, fortunately, Robert sent me the original on this as well. So, here's the original photo that Robert took. And then he's edited it down to this. And what the edit tells us is Robert's decided the important bit here is the dog and the reflection. And I must admit, I do like this reflection in the puddle. That all these bits up here, where you've got a little, a bit of car park and forklift truck and what have you, aren't really relevant to the story. So he's cropped them out. But what Robert has also done, so he's cropped it really quite in. Now, this is. As soon as I say this, Robert, you're going to go, oh yeah. You've got a crop ratio, which for me is the not quite. If you're going square, go square. Just make it square. And if you're not going square, don't be nearly square. Be at least 2x3 or something like that, or even 4x5, but 2x3 or 4x6. Yeah. It's like me with horizons. I get a little bit OCD about this. If you want a square, this isn't quite square. It's just that little bit wider than it is high. And I think just make it square, honestly. And then it fits better also on these apps and Instagram and things like that, which go for straight square ratios anyway. But then you've got control as to which bit gets cropped off. Okay. That aside, let's go back to this. Okay, so what you've got here, what's happened, the way you've edited this, part of the thing is we've got we've got the dog, we've got the reflection. The sun now here has become really bright in the reflection, and actually that's sort of grabbing all our attention. And the fact that then the dog is coming down and looking at it, we then miss part of the reflection because we say, oh, the dog's looking down here. Everything is drawing our attention to this bit. But what is that bit? That bit's just a reflection of the sun. That's not the purpose of the story. That's not what was grabbing your attention. You didn't say to me, Kim, I found this fantastic photo of the sun reflected in a puddle, and I quite like the way the dog enhanced that. The photo is about the dog. The photo is not about the sun in the reflection. The other thing is, the way you've edited this is because you brought up the shadow. I can understand you brought up the shadows, brought down the highlights, mostly tried to compensate for the overdone part of the reflected sun. But it does mean everything else has come. And then you've really, it looks like you've increased the texture. And essentially, everything's sort of become very, very textured. And I think the dog isn't standing out against the background as well as it could have, given that when we look at the original one here, it's very clear we've got the dog standing out against the background. So let's just quickly open this in Photoshop and then talk about, first of all, crop. Now, I know you went for the nearly square crop. I'm kind of tempted, you're right, we don't need too much over there. But, you can bring it in a little bit, something like this. Now, we want to get that reflection in. In fact, we could almost have that kind of, something like that, I think. So we've got, similar amount of gap from the reflection to the bottom of the picture and from the back of the dog to the top of the picture. Something like that. if you wanted to make it slightly more cinematic, you can bring it out a little bit, just do content aware, and open that up a bit. And I think that becomes quite an interesting crop, because forgot to say, there's another bit here, which is actually, there's a reflection of the telegraph pole and the wire that runs in here. What I quite like about that is the diagonal that it creates. There's a little soft diagonal, which is also running in the same kind of rough diagonal aspect of the dog. And so you do get this sort of sense of movement running through the picture. So we've talked before about the idea, verticals give an image stability, but it's the diagonals which give the sense of movement, of energy, of potential. So I think as a crop, I kind of prefer this kind of crop to it. We've got the space to the right of the dog because, again, you want to have the space in front of, it's like if somebody's walking or they're on a bicycle or something like that. Generally speaking, most times, you're better off having the space in front of it rather than behind. So what then about converting to, now it is almost fairly monochromatic in its own right, because we've got the kind of the brown gravel and the brown dog and the sort of brown muddy puddle. As such, everything's kind of become brown. So you could indeed just kind of convert to black and white. Let's take this into camera raw for a moment though, and just sort of see how we would do that. If I just take the desaturate. Again, there is a bit here where, yes, you are wanting to bring out a little bit more on the of the shadows, and I can understand that. So we bring up the shadows a bit. Maybe bring those highlights down a little bit. We kind of end up with a little bit more texture in the puddle. I think we could certainly, again, with just a touch of a vignette, just to kind of draw the attention in like that. So our sort of first level of black and white conversion takes us to this. But I think we can maybe do a little bit more with the dog here. So I'll duplicate that layer again, and let's just take this back into camera raw. And there are a couple of different ways. Now you could go contrast, and that kind of, although that tends to kind of silhouette the dog a little bit more, which is, kind of interesting. Or we go again to clarity, where I think maybe if you kind of do that again, we can up the shadows a little bit, down the highlights a touch, boost the clarity. Maybe even at this point, we could maybe vignette it just a little touch more, something like that. And now we've got the detail coming out of the dog here. Something like that. So we've gone from that to that to that, and I think now we've got this sort of bit more kind of going on. So that's kind of the way I sort of suggest going with it, really. I think the other problem is, if we go back to your version here, overall, apart from that very bright patch here, it's really quite dark. Let me show you just with the levels here. If I take the levels, you look at the histogram over here, everything's sitting over on the left, virtually all of it. And you've got this little spike here. That little spike is that little bit of sunlight reflected here. But nothing else, so actually you kind of almost, just for your own sake, even if you want to keep with that original one, I think you kind of want to bring that up so we can actually see something like that. Now, you might in turn just mask back out this bit of the puddle, something like that, just so that it's so that we're not getting that sun quite strong. That's a very rough edit. We need to do it properly. But just a little point, be aware of your levels with that. But if we flick back to here, I tend to feel that this kind of gives us a little bit more of that story. Like I say, I do actually think the inclusion of that diagonal kind of helps. The fact that even if we still feel that that's a little bit too bright, then maybe if I go to the burn tool and I select highlights, I don't know, let's just take that up to about 30, 40 or something like that. And we'll just, something as, maybe that's a bit too much. Let's take that down to 27. Yeah, something like that. That's just kind of taking that down a touch, taking the edge off, something like that. Now I've also got to be careful. Maybe I could touch the levels up a little bit like that. Even bring that down a touch. There we go. So that's how we kind of end up with that picture. So anyway, Robert, I hope that helps. Hope that gives you some insights and thoughts about editing it. Okay, so what have we got? Susie says, good photos, dog image is really interesting. April says the dog looks like it is looking at the sun, but she likes my crop. Jackie says the telegraph pole is interesting. Rosemary says, agreed, the horizontal crop works well. Robert says, agreed on the crop and edits. I will devote more time to it soon. Right, excellent. Right, okay, that brings us pretty much towards the end of this this podcast. If you found it useful, interesting, educational, you find you're getting a lot out of it, you would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is a way you can do that. Another thing is invite your friends, let other people know if you feel they could benefit from, also that photography could benefit from these podcasts. Let's grow this community. Now, next week we will have another critique section. So if you would like to get your images, if you've got problems, your sticking points, you want to explore ideas, whether in the editing or the actual camera settings or the concept or the narrative, then do submit your images. Either go to Facebook, to the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook group. If you're not already joined it, but you are on Facebook, just type that into Facebook and you will find us easily enough. If you don't do Facebook, then my website or my email address, you've got kimayres.co.uk there, so it's just kim@kimayres.co.uk. Email me your image or post it in the Facebook group. Let me know what your sticking problem is, and if you're wanting any help with the way that it's been edited, then make sure you put the original version in too, so that gives me the maximum amount of options to play with. Next week, I think I'm going to be. I think I've decided I'm going to talk about shutter speed, slow shutter speed. Now, we were talking earlier with Sarah's about the need to increase shutter speed, and very often we're talking about the need to get faster and faster with shutter speed in order to capture particular kinds of detail. However, there are times when slow shutter speed is really the way to go. And whilst I think most of you probably have a rough idea about it, I thought there's no harm in going into a little bit more detail about the benefits or ways you can exploit the slow shutter speed function on your camera. And then what I will do is that will be a precursor for in 2 weeks' time, we will have a slow shutter speed challenge. So planting the seed for that, start thinking about that. So tune in for next Sunday at 3 p.m, where we will talk about slow shutter speed, and then I will set the challenge for the following week. Right, okay, that's it. Thank you ever so much for everybody who turned up, submitted images, joined in the chat. Pleasure having you along. Right, look forward to seeing you all next week, or at the very least in the Facebook group. So some of you will have noticed that I put in a question into the Facebook group midweek. I was asking you what your goals and hopes were for 2022. I've decided I'm going to try and do something a bit more like that, of a kind of a question a week, just to get a little bit more engagement. So if you are on Facebook, it's a place to kind of join in, start chatting, and kind of get some conversations involved as well. So keep an eye out for that. Meanwhile, enjoy the rest of your week, and I'll see you next Sunday. Take care. Bye-bye.